The day Eleanor Wright pulled up to the abandoned Magnolia Grand Hotel in her weathered station wagon, a single suitcase in the back and a cashier's check for $600 in her purse, every business owner in Hartwell Springs watched with a mixture of pity and disbelief. In a resort town where hospitality empires had been built by powerful families over generations and success was measured by occupancy rates and Michelin stars, this middle-aged widow clearly didn't understand what she was getting into. What these seasoned hoteliers couldn't possibly know was that their biggest mistake wasn't doubting her resolve. It would be underestimating what she was about to discover. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Another one bites the dust, muttered Raymond Prescott, whose family owned the gleaming Prescott Plaza Hotel across town, as he watched Eleanor struggle with the rusted padlock on the Magnolia's imposing front doors. That place will swallow her savings faster than a slot machine in Vegas. The Magnolia Grand stood like a faded dowager on the edge of Hartwell Springs, its once elegant Victorian architecture now marred by peeling paint and cracked windows. For over a century, it had been the crown jewel of the mountain resort town, hosting presidents, Hollywood stars, and industrial magnates seeking respite in the healing mineral waters that had given the town its name and purpose. But the last 15 years had seen a steady decline, culminating in the death of its owner, foreclosure, and finally a county auction where Eleanor Wright had been the only bidder. $600 for that money pit, Victoria Sinclair remarked to her husband James as they oversaw the breakfast service at their boutique hotel downtown. She'll be gone by Labor Day, when the first heating bill arrives. Eleanor Wright's arrival had been the subject of speculation for weeks. Rumors circulated that she was everything from a failed actress looking for a project to a mentally unstable lottery winner. Few knew the truth, that at 52, Eleanor was a former hospitality management professor whose husband's 2-year battle with cancer had left her emotionally drained and financially depleted. The small insurance payout had been barely enough to settle their medical debts, leaving her with little more than her academic credentials and a lifetime of theoretical knowledge about hotel operations. Now, as she stood in the cavernous lobby of the Magnolia, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that penetrated the grimy windows, Eleanor fought back a wave of doubt. The once grand space was littered with debris, abandoned furniture draped in sheets, scattered paperwork, even an ancient bellhop's cap lying forgotten in a corner. The magnificent chandelier that had once illuminated society galas hung precariously by a single chain, its crystals dulled by years of neglect. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty room. The answer came in memories of her late husband Michael and their shared dream of someday running a small inn after retirement. "Sometimes the best investments are the ones everyone else is too afraid to make," he had often said. Now here she was, making the boldest investment of her life, alone. Eleanor's methodical exploration of her new property revealed the true extent of the challenge. 86 rooms, spread across 5 floors, a once elegant restaurant space, ballrooms, conference facilities, and the famous mineral spa in the basement, all in various states of disrepair. Water damage had ruined entire sections of the 3rd floor. The kitchen equipment was decades out of date. The plumbing made ominous noises when she tested the taps. But the true shock came when she reached the top floor, home to the legendary presidential suite. Unlike the rest of the hotel, this door was secured with a modern lock, incongruously new against the aged woodwork. Using the master key she'd received from the county clerk, Eleanor entered what had once been the most exclusive accommodation in 3 states. The suite was surprisingly well preserved, as if time had somehow moved more slowly here. Heavy brocade drapes still hung at the windows, faded but intact. Period furniture remained positioned around a massive fireplace. A four-poster bed dominated the bedroom, its linens yellowed but undisturbed. It was as if the last occupants had simply walked out, expecting to return at any moment. In the study, an imposing oak desk faced the mountain view. Behind it stood a painting of the hotel's founder, Judge William Magnolia, who had built the hotel in 1887 after retiring from the federal bench. Something about the painting caught Eleanor's attention. It seemed slightly askew. When she attempted to straighten it, it swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing a wall safe. Eleanor stared at the unexpected discovery, her heart racing. The combination lock was old-fashioned, a relic from another era. On impulse, she tried the hotel's founding date, 1887. To her astonishment, the safe door swung open. Inside lay a leather portfolio, embossed with the seal of the Supreme Court of the United States. With trembling hands, Eleanor removed it, placing it carefully on the desk. Opening it revealed a stack of documents, each bearing official letterhead and signatures she recognized from history books. These weren't copies or reproductions. They were original draft decisions, dissenting opinions, and private correspondences between Supreme Court justices dating back to the 1890s through the 1950s. Eleanor's academic background in American history allowed her to immediately grasp the significance of what she was seeing. These were preliminary decisions and dissents that had never been made public, including alternative rulings for landmark cases that would have dramatically altered the course of American jurisprudence had they been issued instead of the official decisions. A handwritten note on hotel stationery, dated 1954, explained the collection. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As retiring Chief Justice, I entrust these documents to the safekeeping of the Magnolia Grand, where for decades our court has conducted its most delicate deliberations away from Washington's prying eyes and political pressures. The mountain, air and isolation have served our judicial independence well. May these alternative paths of American law remain secure here, as testament to the roads not taken. Eleanor carefully returned the documents to the safe, her mind reeling. Judge Magnolia's hotel had apparently served as an unofficial retreat for the Supreme Court for decades, a place where the justices could deliberate controversial cases away from public scrutiny. The documents represented a historical treasure, trove of incalculable value and potentially explosive political implications if certain decisions had almost gone another way. As she made her way back downstairs, Eleanor's steps were lighter despite the enormity of what she'd discovered. The hotel's secrets would have to wait. First, she needed to make the place habitable. The following morning, Eleanor ventured into downtown Hartwell Springs to introduce herself to the local business community. The town's Chamber of Commerce was hosting its monthly breakfast at the Prescott Plaza, her most formidable competitor. Straightening her one good blazer, Eleanor walked into the opulent ballroom where the meeting was being held. Conversation dimmed as she entered, curious eyes taking in the newcomer. Raymond Prescott, a fourth-generation hotelier with silver hair and a perpetual tan, was holding court near the buffet. He broke off mid-sentence when he spotted Eleanor. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Our newest entrepreneur has joined us. Ms. Wright, isn't it? The new owner of what's left of the Magnolia." Eleanor extended her hand, meeting his condescending smile with quiet confidence. "Eleanor Wright. And yes, I've acquired the Magnolia." "Grand. I'm looking forward to becoming part of the Hartwell Springs business community." Raymond's handshake was perfunctory. Bold move, though perhaps foolhardy, might be a more accurate description. That property has bankrupted its last 3 owners. "I'm aware of the challenges," Eleanor replied, "but I also see the potential." Victoria Sinclair approached, her elegance as carefully cultivated as the English garden behind her boutique hotel. The Magnolia was magnificent in its day, she said, a nostalgic note in her voice. My grandmother used to tell stories about the summer balls held there. Such a shame to see what it's become. That's why I'm here, Eleanor explained, accepting a cup of coffee from a passing server. To restore it, not just physically, but to its proper place in the community. Raymond's laugh was just short of derisive. With all due respect, Ms. Wright, do you have any idea what that would cost? Millions, at minimum. The place needs a complete overhaul, electrical, plumbing, structural repairs. The historical preservation requirements alone would bankrupt a major hotel chain, let alone a... He paused, searching for a diplomatic term. Individual investor. Eleanor had anticipated this reaction. I have a different approach in mind, something more gradual and focused on historical authenticity. The Magnolia wasn't just a hotel, it was a piece of American history. History doesn't pay the bills, Raymond countered. Modern amenities, marketing budgets, and operational efficiency do. This town has evolved. The kind of grand old hotel the Magnolia represents is a relic of the past. Before Eleanor could respond, an elderly man approached their group, leaning heavily on a cane. Marcus Bennett, as his name tag indicated, had a weathered face that suggested decades in the mountain sun. Don't be so quick to dismiss the old ways, Ray, he said. Some of us remember when the Magnolia was the heart and soul of this town. Before your family came along and built that glass monstrosity, someone muttered from the periphery, drawing nervous laughter. Marcus turned to Eleanor. I was the head concierge at the Magnolia for 42 years, young lady. Retired when the Harrington family sold it in '08. If you're serious about bringing her back, I might have some insights to share. Eleanor recognized an ally. I'd appreciate that tremendously, Mr. Bennett. The chamber president called the meeting to order, and Eleanor found herself seated at a table with Marcus and several other older business owners. Throughout the breakfast, she was conscious of the speculative glances from the town's established hoteliers. They were waiting for her to fail, expecting it as a foregone conclusion. When the meeting ended, Marcus Bennett approached Eleanor again. The Magnolia has secrets, Miss Wright, some good, some complicated. If you're determined to bring her back to life, you should know what you're really dealing with. Eleanor thought of the safe and its contents. I think I've already discovered one of those secrets, Mr. Bennett. The old man's eyes sharpened. The presidential suite. The safe behind the judge's portrait? Eleanor's surprise must have shown on her face, because Marcus nodded. I was trusted with all the Magnolia's secrets, including who came and went from that suite without signing the guest register. He lowered his voice. 9 Supreme Court. Justices used to meet there regularly off the record, called it their mountain sessions. I found documents, Eleanor admitted quietly. Draft decisions, alternative rulings. Marcus nodded. The roads not taken. Judge Magnolia's great-grandson was a Supreme Court justice from 1935 to 1954. He continued the tradition his ancestor started, bringing the court to the hotel for unofficial deliberations on their most divisive cases. Eleanor processed this information. Why are you telling me this? Because how you handle those documents will tell me whether you're worthy of the Magnolia, Marcus replied bluntly. That hotel isn't just a business opportunity, Ms. Wright. It's a custodianship. As Eleanor walked back to the Magnolia, her mind raced with possibilities. The hotel's history was even richer than she'd imagined. If properly leveraged, that history could become a unique selling proposition, something no modern hotel could replicate. But first, she needed to make the place functional. With her limited funds, Eleanor knew she couldn't tackle the entire property at once. Instead, She would focus on the original Victorian core of the building. 12 guest rooms, the lobby, and the small dining room. The newer wings would have to wait. That afternoon, a delivery truck arrived from the county seat, bringing the furniture and personal belongings she'd placed in storage after selling her house. As she directed the movers to place her modest furnishings in what had once been the manager's apartment behind the front desk, Eleanor noticed a pickup truck pulling into the cracked driveway. An older woman with salt and pepper hair emerged, followed by a teenager carrying a toolbox. "Miss Wright," the woman called. "I'm Georgia Harding. I own the hardware store in town. Marcus Bennett suggested you might need some help getting this place in order." Eleanor was momentarily speechless at this unexpected offer. "That's very kind, but I can't afford to hire—" "Did I mention payment?" Georgia interrupted with a grin. "My grandfather was the master carpenter who built the Magnolia's grand staircase. I grew up hearing stories about this place. This is my daughter, Lily. She's handy with tools and needs community service hours for school. Mum's making me help because she's nostalgic," Lily explained, rolling her eyes but smiling. "But I'm actually pretty good at fixing things." "We thought we'd start with the front doors," Georgia continued. "Those grand old mahogany pieces deserve better than to be hidden behind plywood." Before Eleanor could fully process this turn of events, another vehicle arrived, an ancient van with Santiago plumbing painted on the side. A middle-aged man with laugh lines around his eyes emerged. "Marcus called, said the Magnolia's pipes were screaming for attention. Thought I'd take a look. Free estimate." By sunset, Eleanor had acquired an impromptu restoration team. Georgia and Lily had removed the plywood covering the front entrance and were carefully rehabilitating the original doors. Carlos Santiago had identified the most critical plumbing issues and was explaining what could wait and what needed immediate attention. His wife Rosa had arrived with a picnic basket of homemade empanadas, which they all shared in the dusty lobby as Eleanor outlined her vision for the hotel. "Not trying to compete with the Prescott or the boutiques," she explained. "The Magnolia should be what it always was, a place with history and character, where the accommodations are comfortable rather than luxurious, and the experience is authentic rather than manufactured. Raymond Prescott won't like the competition, no matter what form it takes," Carlos warned. "His family's been trying to buy this property for years, to tear it down and expand their golf course." "He's not the only one interested," Georgia added. "There's a development company that's been buying up properties all around the old hot springs. Rumor has it they want to build a modern spa resort." Eleanor thought of the documents in the safe upstairs and the historical significance. They added to the property. "The Magnolia isn't going anywhere," she said with newfound determination. "This building has stood for over a century. It's going to stand for a century more." As the informal gathering broke up, Marcus Bennett arrived, observing the progress. With approval. "You've already done more in one day than the last owner did in a year," he noted. "But you've also put a target on your back. Word travels fast in Hartwell Springs." "Meaning what exactly?" Eleanor asked. "Meaning Raymond Prescott is on the phone right now with his friends at the bank, the zoning board, and the historical preservation committee," Marcus explained. "By morning you'll be facing your first real opposition." "I've faced worse," Eleanor said quietly, thinking of the hospital rooms and sleepless nights of her husband's illness. "Besides, I have something they don't." "And what's that?" Marcus asked. Eleanor smiled. "The truth about the Magnolia, and if necessary, the leverage that comes with it." As darkness fell and her new allies departed, Eleanor climbed the grand staircase to the presidential suite. The documents in the safe represented both opportunity and responsibility. In the wrong hands, they could become political dynamite, potentially undermining public confidence in the Supreme Court by revealing how close many landmark decisions had come to going the other way. But in the right hands, her hands, they might be the key to saving the Magnolia Grand, not by exposing them, but by ensuring their preservation became part of the hotel's protected status. As she carefully examined each document by lamplight, Eleanor began to understand why Judge Magnolia had created this sanctuary for the court. Away from Washington's political pressures, the justices had been free to consider all sides of each case, to debate and deliberate without external influences. The alternative drafts showed how fluid constitutional interpretation could be, how a single justice changing their mind could alter the course of American law. Eleanor's academic background helped her recognize the historical significance of what she held. These weren't just legal documents. They were a window into the human process behind the court's most momentous decisions, revealing the doubts, compromises, and evolving thought processes of the justices. The collection needed proper preservation and eventually appropriate academic study. But first, the Magnolia needed to be saved. And to save it, Eleanor would have to stand her ground against forces far more powerful than a widow with a dream, and $600 to her name. As she replaced the documents in the safe, Eleanor felt a renewed sense of purpose. Michael had always believed in her ability to create something meaningful. Now, against all odds, she had found a project worthy of that belief. Not just restoring a building, but preserving a unique piece of American history. Eleanor slept that night in the manager's apartment, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked, lulled by the creaking of the old hotel as it settled around her. In her dreams, she saw the Magnolia as it once was, and as it could be again, filled with guests who appreciated its historical significance and authentic character. She couldn't possibly know that across town, Raymond Prescott was hosting a dinner for the mayor, the county commissioner, and the head of the Historical Preservation Committee, where the main topic of conversation was the most efficient way to force Eleanor Wright to give up her foolish endeavor before she embarrassed herself and complicated their development plans for the Hot Springs district. The battle for the Magnolia's future was just beginning, and Eleanor's discovery in the presidential suite would prove to be both her greatest asset and her most dangerous liability in the fight ahead. Eleanor's first week at the Magnolia revealed the true magnitude of the challenge she'd undertaken. The electrical system needed complete rewiring, the roof leaked in 17 places, and the once magnificent hardwood floors were warped from years of water damage. Each day brought new discoveries, most of them unwelcome. Yet with each problem she uncovered, Eleanor's determination only grew stronger. "Structural report doesn't look good," Carlos Santiago said one morning, shaking his head as he examined the sagging ceiling in what had once been the hotel's grand ballroom. "Foundations solid, they built these old places to last, but you've got serious water damage in the West Wing." Eleanor nodded, making notes in the detailed spreadsheet she'd created to track repairs. "Priority list," she murmured. "What absolutely needs fixing versus what can wait." "Smart approach," Carlos approved. "Too many folks come in wanting to do everything at once, run out of money halfway through, and end up with a half-finished disaster." Georgia Harding arrived with salvaged Victorian-era doorknobs she'd found at an estate sale. "Original brass," she announced proudly, "almost an exact match to what would have been here. Lily's cleaning them up now." Word of Eleanor's project had spread through Hartwell Springs, dividing the town into two camps. Older residents who remembered the Magnolia's glory days offered encouragement and occasional help. A retired electrician volunteered to inspect the wiring. The local historical society provided photographs of the hotel from its heyday, giving Eleanor valuable reference points for authentic restoration. But the town's established business community remained skeptical at best, hostile at worst. The Hartwell Springs Business Journal ran an editorial questioning whether amateur restoration projects undermined the town's image as a luxury destination. Though the Magnolia wasn't mentioned by name, everyone understood the reference. On Friday morning, Eleanor was scraping peeling paint from the lobby wainscoting when the front doors opened, admitting Raymond Prescott and a woman in a crisp pantsuit carrying a leather portfolio. "Miss Wright," Raymond called, his voice echoing in the high-ceiling space. "I hope we're not interrupting your renovation." The pause before the last word made it clear he considered her efforts futile. Eleanor set down her scraper and removed her work gloves. "Mr. Prescott, what brings you to the Magnolia?" "A proposition," he replied, gesturing to his companion. "This is Veronica Chambers from Summit Development. They've been acquiring properties in the Hot Springs district for a comprehensive resort development. Very exciting for our town's future." Miss Chambers extended a manicured hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Ms. Wright. I've heard so much about your ambitious project." Her tone suggested ambitious was a polite substitute for delusional. But Eleanor shook her hand anyway. "How can I help you both?" Veronica opened her portfolio, extracting a glossy presentation folder. "Summit Development envisions transforming the Hot Springs district into a world-class wellness destination," she explained, displaying renderings of modern glass and steel buildings surrounding landscaped pools. "The Magnolia property is strategically situated at the heart of our proposed development area." "I see," Eleanor said carefully, "and you're here because—" "We'd like to make you an offer," Raymond stated bluntly. "A generous one, considering the property's condition. Summit is prepared to pay $1.2 million for the hotel and grounds." The figure momentarily took Eleanor's breath away. From a $600 investment to over $1 million in just days, most people would consider it a miraculous windfall. "That's 2,000 times what I paid," she observed. Raymond smiled thinly. The auction price was absurdly low due to the condition and back taxes. "We're offering market value for the land, which is the only real asset here. The building itself is a liability." "We understand you've developed an attachment to the property," Veronica added with practiced sympathy. "But realistically, full restoration would cost upwards of $10 million. Our offer allows you to walk away with a substantial profit and no further headaches." Eleanor glanced around the lobby, seeing beyond the current disrepair to the magnificent space it had once been and could be again. "And what would happen to the Magnolia under Summit's ownership?" Raymond and Veronica exchanged glances. "Unfortunately, the structure isn't salvageable within our development parameters," Veronica explained. "We would preserve certain architectural elements as homages within the new complex, but the building itself would be replaced with a modern facility that meets current standards and expectations." "You'd demolish it," Eleanor translated. "We'd honor its legacy," Raymond corrected, "while creating something sustainable for the future. The past is valuable, Ms. Wright, but progress is inevitable." Eleanor thought of the documents hidden in the presidential suite. The Magnolia wasn't just an old hotel. It was a repository of American judicial history, a place where some of the nation's most consequential legal decisions had been deliberated, away from public scrutiny. "I appreciate your offer," she said finally, "but the Magnolia isn't for sale." Raymond's cordial demeanor cooled noticeably. "I strongly advise you to reconsider. Summit's timeline is aggressive, and this offer won't remain open indefinitely. Furthermore," Veronica added, "should you continue with your restoration attempts, you'll face significant regulatory hurdles. The property's historical designation requires adherence to preservation standards that are extremely costly. And there are serious safety concerns that would need to be addressed before you could legally host guests." The implicit threat wasn't lost on Eleanor. They were prepared to use regulatory mechanisms to obstruct her if she wouldn't sell willingly. "I'll keep that in mind," she replied evenly. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" After they departed, Eleanor sank onto a dusty bench, the enormity of what she'd just refused washing over her. The money would have solved all her financial worries. She could have bought a comfortable home, invested the rest, and lived securely for years. Instead, she'd chosen to continue a project that might bankrupt her, facing opposition from the town's most powerful business leaders. "You told them no." Eleanor startled at the voice. Marcus Bennett stood in the doorway to the old concierge desk, where he'd apparently been listening. "You heard all that?" she asked. "Enough." He entered the lobby, his cane tapping on the worn marble floor. "Most folks would have taken the money and run." "I'm not most folks," Eleanor replied. "Besides, there's more at stake here than just an old building." Marcus nodded, understanding her reference to the documents. Ray Prescott wasn't exaggerating about the regulatory challenges. His family has connections throughout the county. Government. They can make things very difficult. "I assumed as much." Eleanor stood, brushing dust from her jeans. "I'll just have to be smarter, work harder, and want it more than they do." Marcus studied her with newfound respect. "Michael chose well," he said quietly. Eleanor's head snapped up. "You knew my husband, not personally, but he wrote to me about 5 years ago, inquiring about the Magnolia's history for a book he was researching on historic American hotels. We corresponded for several months when he mentioned his wife was a hospitality management professor with a passion for historical properties. I remembered." Eleanor was momentarily speechless. Michael had never mentioned corresponding with anyone from the Magnolia. Then again, his illness had come soon after, consuming their lives with hospital visits and treatment plans. "He never finished the book," she said finally. "Cancer." Marcus nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry. He struck me as a fine man, very knowledgeable. About historical preservation," he hesitated. "If you don't mind my asking, is that why you bought this place? Because of his interest in it?" Eleanor considered the question. "Partly," she admitted, "but also because I needed a purpose again. After Michael died, I was just existing, teaching classes, grading papers, coming home to an empty house. When I saw the auction notice for the Magnolia, something clicked. Here was this once magnificent place, abandoned and undervalued, but still standing, still fighting to exist." "Like you," Marcus observed. "Like me," Eleanor agreed with a small smile. The parallel wasn't lost on me. The old concierge reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small leather-bound book. "Your husband sent me a copy of his research notes. I thought you might want them." Eleanor accepted the notebook with trembling hands. Michael's familiar handwriting filled the pages, observations about the Magnolia's architectural significance, notes on its famous guests, questions about renovation techniques appropriate for Victorian structures. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching this unexpected connection to her late husband. "This means more than you can know." Marcus nodded. "One more thing," he said, his voice lowering. "About those documents upstairs. You should know there are people who suspect they exist. Academic rumors mostly about the court's mountain sessions. Nothing concrete. But if the wrong people learned they were here—" "I understand," Eleanor assured him. "They're secure." After Marcus left, Eleanor retreated to the manager's apartment with Michael's notebook, reading his observations. About the Magnolia, his excitement about its historical significance, his ideas for how it might be restored, strengthened her resolve. This wasn't just her project now, it was a continuation of something Michael had valued. The next morning brought another unwelcome surprise. A notice from the county building inspector had been taped to the front door, scheduling a comprehensive safety inspection the following week. The timing, immediately after Prescott's visit, was surely no coincidence. "They're not wasting any time," Georgia observed when she arrived to continue work on the doors. "Building inspector's office hasn't bothered with this place in years, and suddenly they're concerned about safety violations." "Raymond's putting pressure on them," Eleanor confirmed, "which means we have 6 days to address the most obvious safety issues." Georgia's network of local craftspeople mobilized with remarkable speed. Carlos Santiago brought his entire crew to address the plumbing and electrical emergencies. Georgia's husband, a retired contractor, reinforced a sagging section of the East Wing. Lily recruited classmates to clear debris and hazardous materials. Even Marcus contributed, using his knowledge of the building to identify which issues inspectors were most likely to flag. Working around the clock, they managed to make the first floor and manager's apartment minimally compliant with safety codes. The rest of the hotel remained problematic, but Eleanor's strategy was to demonstrate good faith efforts toward full compliance. The morning of the inspection, Eleanor was surprised to find Victoria Sinclair at her door. The elegant boutique hotel owner seemed uncomfortable as she surveyed the renovation work. "Miss Wright," she began formally, "I wanted to speak with you before the inspector arrives." Eleanor invited her in, curious about this unexpected visit from one of Hartwell Springs' established hoteliers. "I'll be direct," Victoria said once. They were seated in the partially restored lobby. "I was at a dinner party at the Prescotts last weekend." Raymond was quite open about his plans to, as he put it, regulatory you out of business. "The inspector coming today has been instructed to find enough violations to shut you down immediately." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" Victoria sighed, her carefully maintained facade cracking slightly. "Because it's wrong. Competition is one thing, we all face that, but using governmental powers to eliminate a small business before it can even start?" She shook her head. "That's not how my family has operated for 3 generations in this town." "I appreciate the warning," Eleanor said, "but why risk alienating the Prescotts by helping me?" "Because the Magnolia deserves better," Victoria replied simply. "My grandmother worked here as a girl before she married my grandfather, and they started their own place. She always spoke of it with such reverence." She hesitated. "And frankly, Raymond's development plans would hurt all the existing hotels in town, not just you. A corporate resort would fundamentally change Hartwell Springs' character." Before Eleanor could respond, a county vehicle pulled into the driveway. The inspector, a thin man with a perpetual frown, approached with clipboard in hand. "Ms. Wright? Harold Jenkins, County Building Inspector. I'm here to evaluate code compliance." Victoria rose smoothly. "Inspector Jenkins, how lovely to see you again. I was just telling Ms. Wright about how thoroughly you reviewed our property last year. Such attention to detail." Jenkins seemed flustered by Victoria's presence. "Mrs. Sinclair, I didn't expect to see you here. I've been advising Ms. Wright on bringing the Magnolia up to code. Such an important historical property deserves proper restoration, don't you think?" The inspection proceeded with Victoria shadowing them, her presence clearly affecting Jenkins' approach. Though he documented numerous violations, his tone was less confrontational than Eleanor had feared. Victoria's implicit support from a respected local business owner had changed the dynamics. When Jenkins finally departed, with a list of required remediation, Eleanor turned to Victoria with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. I think that would have gone very differently without you here. You've still got a mountain of violations to Address, Victoria warned, but at least he's giving you 30 days rather than shutting you down immediately, which was the original plan. Why are you really helping me? Eleanor asked. Beyond your grandmother's connection to the place? Victoria considered the question. Because I think Hartwell Springs needs the Magnolia, not as a sterile corporate resort, but as what it was, a place with character and history. My hotel caters to a different clientele than you would. We can coexist without directly competing. She paused. And because I admire your courage, taking this on alone, refusing Summit's offer, it's either madness or extraordinary determination. Possibly both, Eleanor admitted with a rueful smile. Well, madness or not, you've made an impression on quite a few people in town. Victoria reached into her purse and withdrew a business card. Call me if you need anything. Within reason, of course. We are still competitors, after all. After Victoria left, Eleanor studied the inspector's report. The violations were extensive, but addressable given time and resources. The 30-day window was tight, but not impossible, if she could find the money for materials and specialized contractors. That evening, as she pored over Michael's notebook seeking insights on historical renovation techniques, Eleanor came across a page she'd missed. Tucked between observations about the Magnolia's architectural details was a note about the hotel's famous mineral spring. According to local records, the original hot spring that made the Magnolia famous still exists beneath the hotel, though it was capped in the 1970s when the spa facilities were modernized. Monsieur Bennett confirms the spring's output diminished but never ceased, an untapped resource literally underfoot. Eleanor reread the passage several times. If the original mineral spring still flowed beneath the hotel, it could be a crucial differentiator for the restored Magnolia. Summit Development was planning to create artificial spa facilities, but the Magnolia could offer access to the authentic natural spring that had drawn visitors for over a century. She called Marcus immediately. Is it true the original spring is still active beneath the hotel? In the old boiler room, Marcus. Confirmed. They capped it when they installed modern heating, but it's still there. Maintenance staff used to check it regularly to ensure it wasn't causing foundation issues. Could it be restored? Used again for spa facilities? Theoretically, yes. The water quality was tested periodically. Always came back with the same mineral composition that made it famous for its therapeutic properties. But reopening it would require permits, water rights verification, significant renovation. Eleanor's mind raced with possibilities. And who currently holds the water rights? That's the interesting part, Marcus replied. They're tied to the property deed. Whoever owns the Magnolia owns the rights to the spring. It's why Summit wants your land so badly. They need those water rights for their development. Without them, their spa concept falls apart. This revelation changed everything. The spring wasn't just a potential feature for the restored hotel. It was a powerful bargaining chip. Summit's entire development hinged on acquiring water rights that Eleanor now controlled. The next morning, Eleanor descended to the hotel's basement with a flashlight and Marcus's hand-drawn map. The old boiler room was a cavernous space filled with antiquated equipment, much of it rusted beyond repair. Following Marcus's directions, she located a sealed concrete cap in the corner, approximately 3 feet in diameter. The cap was secured with bolts that had grown stiff with age and mineral deposits. Using tools borrowed from Carlos, Eleanor struggled to loosen them. Finally, the last bolt gave way, and she was able to shift the heavy concrete lid slightly. A rush of warm, mineral-scented air escaped from the opening. Shining her flashlight into the gap, Eleanor could see steaming water about 4 feet below, its surface occasionally bubbling as gases escaped from below. "Incredible," she whispered, reaching down to touch the water. It was pleasantly warm, not scalding, with a silky texture that left her fingertips feeling softer. This was the famous healing water that had made Hartwell Springs a destination for the wealthy and powerful for generations. Eleanor carefully replaced the cap, her mind whirling with the implications of her discovery. The spring was active, accessible, and legally hers. With the right approach, it could become the centerpiece of the Magnolia's revival. Returning to the presidential suite, Eleanor examined the Supreme Court documents again, this time with a different perspective. Several cases in the collection dealt with water rights disputes and property law. The justices who had deliberated in this very room had shaped the legal precedents that now protected her ownership of the spring. The irony wasn't lost on her. History wasn't just an abstract concept at the Magnolia. It was a living force that continued to influence the present. As the sun set over Hartwell Springs, Eleanor stood on the Magnolia's wraparound porch, watching. Lights come on in the town below, 30 days to address the code violations, limited funds to make it happen, powerful opponents working actively against her. Yet for the first time since arriving, Eleanor felt the odds shifting in her favor. The spring was a game-changer, both as a unique feature for the restored hotel and as leverage against Summit's development plans. And the growing network of local allies, from Marcus's historical knowledge to Carlos's practical skills to Victoria's unexpected support, gave her resources beyond mere money. Most importantly, she had found purpose again. The Magnolia wasn't just a business venture. It was a mission to preserve something valuable, something with significance beyond commercial considerations. "We're going to make it," she promised the old building, laying her hand against its weathered exterior. They underestimated both of us. What Eleanor couldn't know was that across town, Summit Development's board was meeting in emergency session. The geological survey for their spa complex had revealed an alarming truth. Without access to the Magnolia's spring, their entire concept was unviable. The artificial wells they had planned to drill would not produce water with the same mineral composition that had made Hartwell Springs famous. "We need those water rights," Veronica Chambers insisted, slapping a report down on the conference table. "Without them, we're just building another generic resort." "Wright won't sell," Raymond Prescott reminded her. "She's turned down offers well above market value." "Then we need to change our approach," Veronica replied, her expression hardening. "If she won't respond to financial incentives, perhaps she'll respond to pressure of a different kind." The battle for the Magnolia, and the precious resource beneath it, was about to escalate in ways Eleanor couldn't anticipate. But for tonight, in the quiet of her partially restored hotel, she allowed herself a moment of optimism. The path forward was becoming clearer, and for the first time in years, Eleanor Wright felt truly alive. 3 weeks into Eleanor's 30-day compliance window, the Magnolia was transforming. The lobby's marble floor gleamed after Georgia, and her team spent days restoring it. Carlos's crew had replaced the dangerous electrical wiring throughout the first floor and installed a new fire alarm system. The 12 guest rooms Eleanor had chosen for initial restoration were taking shape with period-appropriate fixtures, salvaged antiques, and fresh paint in historically accurate colors. Progress was visible, undeniable, and, according to Raymond Prescott, absolutely irrelevant. "The violations report specified full compliance, Ms. Wright," Raymond reminded her during an impromptu visit one afternoon. He surveyed the improvements with a dismissive glance. "You've addressed perhaps 20% of the issues. The inspector will have no choice but to shut you down when he returns." Eleanor maintained her composure despite her growing dislike. "For the man, we're working methodically through the list, prioritizing safety concerns. The inspector understands this is a phased restoration." "Does he?" Raymond raised an eyebrow. I wouldn't count on continued leniency. Hartwell Springs has standards to maintain. After he left, Eleanor fought back a wave of frustration. Despite their progress, Raymond was right about one thing. They couldn't possibly address all the violations within the 30-day window. The cost of materials alone was straining her limited budget to the breaking point. That evening, Eleanor convened what had become a regular strategy session in the Magnolia's partially restored dining room. Marcus, Carlos, Georgia and her family, and several other local supporters gathered around a makeshift conference table, sharing a potluck dinner as they discussed next steps. "We've made incredible progress," Eleanor began, trying to focus on the positive. "But we still have major issues to resolve before the inspection, particularly the structural repairs in the East Wing and the fire suppression system throughout the building." "Those are the big-ticket items," Carlos agreed. "Even with donated labor, we're looking at material costs upwards of $50,000 for the minimal compliance approach." A discouraged silence fell over the group. They had accomplished so much through determination and community effort, but some obstacles couldn't be overcome without financial resources. "What about a loan?" suggested Lily, who had become increasingly invested in the project. "The bank won't touch this place," Marcus interrupted gently. "Not with Summit Development. Applying pressure behind the scenes, they've made sure the Magnolia is considered too high risk." Eleanor had already explored that option, approaching 3 different banks, only to be politely but firmly rejected each time. "There might be another way," Victoria Sinclair said from the doorway. No one had noticed her arrival. She entered the dining room, looking somewhat uncomfortable among the work clothes and pizza boxes. Heritage tourism grants. The State Historical Society administers a program for properties with significant historical value. "We've considered that," Eleanor replied, "but the application process takes months, and we need funds immediately." Victoria nodded. "Normally, yes, but I serve on the Historical Society's board. We're meeting next week to review emergency grant applications. If you could document the Magnolia's historical significance beyond the obvious architectural value, there might be a case for expedited consideration." Eleanor exchanged a glance with Marcus. The Supreme Court documents were precisely the kind of historical significance that would guarantee grant approval, but revealing their existence carried its own risks. "I may have something," Eleanor said carefully, "but it would need to be handled with appropriate discretion. The Society understands the sensitivity of historical materials," Victoria assured her. "We work with private collections frequently." Later, after the others had departed, Eleanor led Victoria to the presidential suite. She had come to trust the boutique hotelier, whose assistance had proven genuine despite their theoretical competition. "What I'm about to show you is known to very few people," Eleanor explained as they entered the suite. "Its historical significance is unquestionable, but its political sensitivity requires careful handling." She opened the safe behind the portrait, removing the leather portfolio with its Supreme Court seal. Victoria's eyes widened as Eleanor carefully displayed selected documents, draft decisions, private correspondences between justices, notes from deliberations conducted at the Magnolia over decades. "These are authentic," Victoria breathed, handling the papers with reverent care. "Completely," Eleanor confirmed. "The Magnolia served as an unofficial retreat for the Supreme Court for nearly 70 years. These documents reveal alternative paths American jurisprudence might have taken, decisions that were nearly made, dissents that almost became majority opinions." Victoria looked up from the papers, her expression transformed. "This isn't just historically significant, Eleanor. It's a national treasure. These materials belong in an archive, accessible to historians and legal scholars. Eventually, yes, Eleanor agreed. But first, the Magnolia needs to be saved. These documents are part of the hotel's legacy. They belong here, where they were created. Victoria carefully returned the papers to the portfolio. The Historical Society will approve emergency funding with this documentation, I have no doubt. But you should consider what happens afterward. These materials deserve proper preservation. One step at a time, Eleanor replied. First, we save the building. The following week brought a flurry of activity. Victoria expedited the grant application, using carefully redacted photographs of selected documents to demonstrate the Magnolia's unique historical significance without revealing sensitive details. Meanwhile, work continued on addressing the code violations, with local volunteers devoting evenings and weekends to the restoration efforts. Eleanor was supervising the installation of new sprinkler systems when Carlos Santiago rushed in, his expression unusually grave. "You need to see this," he said, leading her outside to where a crew was digging trenches for updated water lines. The excavation had uncovered a network of pipes extending from beneath the hotel toward the property line. Pipes that weren't on any of the building's plans. "These aren't original to the building," Carlos explained, kneeling beside the trench. "Modern PVC, probably installed in the last decade. And look where they're heading." The pipes ran directly toward the boundary with the vacant lot now owned by Summit Development. "They're tapping into your spring," Carlos concluded, "diverting water off your property." Eleanor felt a cold anger rising. "Is it legal?" "Not even close," Carlos replied. "Water rights in this state are explicitly tied to property ownership. This is straightforward theft." Eleanor immediately called Marcus, who arrived with remarkable speed for a man of his age. His face darkened as he examined the unauthorized pipes. "This explains a lot," he said grimly. "The previous owner was deep in debt before he died. Rumor was he'd taken payoffs from developers. Must have allowed them to install these to divert water for testing without going through proper channels." "Can we prove Summit was involved?" Eleanor asked. "These pipes lead directly to their property," Carlos pointed out, "and their geological survey wouldn't make sense without water samples from your spring." Eleanor considered their options. "We need documentation before we do anything else. Photographs, measurements, water samples from both ends of the pipes." "And then," Marcus asked. "Then we use this leverage appropriately," Eleanor replied, a strategy already forming in her mind. The documentation process was meticulous. Carlos brought in a licensed surveyor to officially map the unauthorized pipes. They collected water samples and had them independently tested, confirming the diverted water came from the Magnolia's spring. Eleanor consulted a water rights attorney who confirmed the clear violation of state law. Armed with this evidence, Eleanor could have immediately filed complaints with multiple regulatory agencies. Instead, she requested a meeting with Veronica Chambers and the Summit Development Board at the Magnolia. The meeting was set for Thursday afternoon. That morning, Eleanor received a call from Victoria Sinclair with momentous news. "The Historical Society approved your emergency grant," Victoria announced. $200,000 for immediate structural repairs and historical preservation. The full board was unanimous. These documents represent a unique cultural asset that must be preserved. Eleanor nearly dropped the phone. 200,000, that's far more than we requested. "The Society recognizes the Magnolia's national significance," Victoria explained. "This is just the beginning. Once the initial restoration is complete, there will be opportunities for additional grants, possibly federal funding for a proper archival facility for the documents. The grant changed everything. With adequate funding for the critical repairs, the Magnolia would easily pass the upcoming inspection. Summit's regulatory pressure strategy had been neutralized. When Veronica Chambers arrived with her development team that afternoon, they found a very different Magnolia than they had seen weeks earlier. The grand entrance had been restored to its original magnificence, with polished brass fixtures and gleaming hardwood. The lobby showed clear signs of professional restoration in progress. Most importantly, they were greeted by Eleanor Wright, radiating quiet confidence rather than desperate determination. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said, leading them to the dining room where maps and documents were arranged on a conference table. "I believe we have mutual interests to discuss." Raymond Prescott arrived last, looking irritated at being summoned to the property he had dismissed as unsalvageable. His expression changed to wariness when he noticed the enlarged photographs of the unauthorized pipes displayed on easels. "What's this about, Miss Wright?" Veronica asked, her professional demeanor firmly in place despite the unexpected setting. "Water rights," Eleanor replied simply. "Specifically the illegal diversion of water from the Magnolia's mineral spring to Summit Development's property." The room grew very quiet. Veronica and Raymond exchanged glances. "That's a serious accusation," Veronica said carefully. "It's not an accusation," Eleanor corrected her. "It's a documented fact." She gestured to the surveyor's report, water analysis, and legal opinion laid out on the table. These pipes were installed without proper permits, without the property owner's knowledge or consent, and in direct violation of state water rights laws. Raymond Prescott's face had flushed an unhealthy red. "This is absurd. If the previous owner made unauthorized modifications, the pipes were installed 3 years ago, according to materials dating," Eleanor interrupted. "Summit Development began acquiring adjacent properties 4 years ago. The timeline speaks for itself." Veronica maintained better composure than Raymond, quickly assessing the situation. "What exactly are you proposing, Ms. Wright?" Eleanor sat at the head of the table, the position of authority. "I'm proposing a mutually beneficial resolution. The Magnolia will not file complaints with regulatory authorities regarding the unauthorized water diversion, provided Summit Development agrees to certain conditions." She outlined her terms. Summit would abandon any attempt to acquire the Magnolia property. Instead, they would enter a contractual agreement to purchase water rights for a specific volume of spring water at fair market value, with the Magnolia retaining primary usage rights. Additionally, Summit would withdraw any regulatory objections to the Magnolia's restoration and publicly support its designation as a National Historic Landmark. "This is extortion," Raymond sputtered. "This is negotiation," Eleanor corrected him. "Summit needs access to authentic mineral water for its spa development to be viable. The Magnolia can provide that access legally and reliably at a fair price. In exchange, Summit acknowledges the Magnolia's right to exist alongside its new development." Veronica Chambers studied Eleanor with newfound respect. "You've done your research, Ms. Wright." "I have," Eleanor agreed, "just as I've secured full funding for the Magnolia's restoration through the State Historical Society, removing any financial pressure points Summit might have planned to exploit." This news visibly surprised the development team. Their strategy had clearly relied on Eleanor's financial vulnerability. "The Magnolia will be restored," Eleanor continued. "That's no longer in question. The only question is whether Summit Development wants to be perceived as a partner in preserving local heritage while advancing responsible development, or as a corporate predator attempting to eliminate historic properties through underhanded tactics." Veronica conferred quietly with her team, while Raymond fumed silently. Finally, she turned back to Eleanor. "Your terms are broadly acceptable. though we'll need to negotiate specific details regarding water volume and pricing. My attorneys will contact yours, Eleanor replied smoothly, though in truth she had only the one water rights lawyer working on contingency. After the summit team departed, Marcus let out a low whistle. "That was masterful," he said admiringly. "You outmaneuvered them completely." "Not completely," Eleanor cautioned. "Raymond is still furious, and Veronica is too savvy to be caught off guard twice. We've won this round, but they'll be looking for other ways to gain advantage." "But we've secured the Magnolia's immediate future," Marcus pointed out. "The grant money ensures we'll pass inspection, and Summit can't use regulatory pressure without exposing their own violations." Eleanor nodded, allowing herself to acknowledge their progress. "We've bought time and leverage. Now we need to deliver on the restoration." The following weeks transformed the Magnolia through a combination of professional craftspeople, now affordable thanks to the grant, and continued community involvement. The first floor was fully restored to its Victorian splendor. The 12 guest rooms Eleanor had designated for the initial opening were furnished with period-appropriate antiques, complemented by discreetly modern amenities. Most significantly, work began on restoring the original mineral spa in the basement. Rather than the artificial facilities Summit had planned, the Magnolia would offer guests an authentic experience in the very spa that had hosted luminaries. From Mark Twain to Franklin Roosevelt, the 30-day inspection deadline arrived with the Magnolia in full compliance on all critical safety issues. Inspector Jenkins, clearly surprised by the transformation, could find no grounds for denying the occupancy permit for the restored sections of the hotel. "Remarkable progress," he acknowledged as he signed the approval forms. "I wouldn't have thought it possible in this time frame." "It wasn't just me," Eleanor explained, gesturing to the team of volunteers and workers who had gathered to witness this milestone. "The Magnolia has more friends than I realized." With the occupancy permit secured, Eleanor could proceed with opening the first phase of the restored hotel. The grand reopening was scheduled for the following month, timed to coincide with Hartwell Springs' annual Heritage Festival. As opening day approached, unexpected allies emerged. The local newspaper ran a feature on the Magnolia's history and restoration, highlighting its unique architectural features and historical significance, though the Supreme Court documents remained a carefully guarded secret, known only to the Historical Society's board. Local businesses, recognizing the potential tourism draw of a restored historical hotel, offered cross-promotional opportunities. The Chamber of Commerce, which had initially been cool to Eleanor's project under Raymond's influence, now included the Magnolia in its official town brochures. Even more surprisingly, several of Summit Development's investors reached out privately to Eleanor, expressing interest in the Magnolia's business model. Unlike Raymond, they saw the potential complementary relationship between the modern spa, resort and the historic hotel, each offering distinct experiences that could collectively make Hartwell Springs a more compelling destination. The night before the grand reopening, Eleanor stood alone in the Magnolia's lobby, marveling at the transformation. The grand staircase gleamed under carefully restored chandeliers. The reception desk, crafted from original mahogany, awaited its first guests. Fresh flowers from George's garden filled antique vases, their scent mingling with the lemon oil used on the woodwork. It wasn't perfect. The east and west wings remained under renovation, and only a fraction of the original rooms were ready for occupancy. But the heart of the Magnolia beat strongly again, its character and history preserved rather than erased. Eleanor climbed the stairs to the presidential suite, which she had restored with particular care. Though not yet available for guest bookings, it had been prepared for a special purpose. Behind the portrait of Judge Magnolia, the safe remained, but its contents had been carefully organized and properly preserved in acid-free archival materials. Tomorrow, as part of the private opening ceremony, Eleanor would sign an agreement with the State Historical Society, establishing the Magnolia as the permanent home of the Supreme Court collection, with appropriate facilities for scholarly research and preservation. The documents would remain where history had placed them, protected now by institutional support and professional archival standards. As she turned to leave the suite, Eleanor noticed a small leather-bound book on the writing desk that she didn't recognize. Opening it, she found an inscription on the first page in Marcus Bennett's distinctive handwriting. To Eleanor Wright, who reminded us all that history isn't something to be discarded when inconvenient, but preserved when most threatened. The Magnolia's story continues with a worthy new chapter. The pages that followed contained photographs, news clippings, and handwritten accounts of the hotel's history. A community-sourced archive of the Magnolia's significance to Hartwell. Springs over generations. Eleanor was still holding the book when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Victoria Sinclair appeared in the doorway, dressed elegantly, as always. "I hope I'm not intruding," Victoria said. "The front door was open, and I wanted to see the final preparations." "Not at all," Eleanor assured her, showing her the book. "Have you seen this?" Victoria smiled. "It was a community project. Everyone contributed memories, photographs, stories about the Magnolia. Marcus coordinated it, but dozens of local residents participated. Including you," Eleanor guessed, noting Victoria's satisfied expression. "My family has been in Hartwell Springs for 3 generations, Victoria replied. "The Magnolia was part of all our lives, even as competitors. My grandmother's first job was here. My father proposed to my mother in the garden out back." She glanced around the restored suite. Places like this anchor communities to their past. Without them, we lose our shared stories. Eleanor was touched by this unexpected sentiment from a woman who had initially seemed the embodiment of polished business pragmatism. "Thank you for your help, Victoria. I couldn't have done this without your support." "You would have found a way," Victoria replied with certainty. "But I'm glad I could be part of it." She hesitated. "Raymond is still furious, you should know. The water rights agreement was a significant public defeat for him. He's not a man who forgets such things." "I didn't expect this journey to be without opposition," Eleanor acknowledged. "But the Magnolia has survived world wars, the Depression, and decades of neglect. I think it can handle Raymond Prescott." As Victoria departed, Eleanor took a final walk through the hotel, checking last-minute details for tomorrow's opening. Everything was ready. The restored rooms gleaming, the dining room set for its first breakfast service, welcome packages prepared for the inaugural guests. Outside in the garden, strings of vintage-style lights illuminated newly planted flower beds and restored pathways. The Magnolia's exterior had been repainted in its original colors, the wraparound porch rebuilt with meticulous attention to historical accuracy. From the street, it glowed with warmth and invitation, a beacon of preserved history rather than a relic of forgotten glory. Eleanor's phone chimed with a text message from Carlos. "Water flowing perfectly in the spa. Heating system holding steady. All systems go for tomorrow." Another message followed immediately from Georgia. "Final delivery of linens arrived. Rooms fully prepared." Nervous? Eleanor smiled as she texted back, terrified, exhilarated, grateful, and she was grateful for the unlikely allies who had become friends, for the community that had embraced her vision, for the Historical Society's validation, and even for Summit Development's grudging cooperation. Most of all, she was grateful for the chain of events that had led her to the Magnolia. From Michael's research interest to the chance sighting of an auction notice, from the discovery of the Supreme Court documents to the revelation of the diverted spring, coincidences that now seemed like destiny. As Eleanor returned to her apartment behind the reception area, her permanent residence now, as she had sold her previous home to fund the restoration, she passed a portrait of Judge William Magnolia in the hallway. The hotel's founder seemed to regard her with approval from his gilded frame. "We did it," she told the painting quietly. "The Magnolia stands. Your legacy continues." Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The hotel's economic viability remained to be proven. The full restoration would take years to complete. Summit development, particularly Raymond Prescott, remained a potential threat. But tonight, Eleanor Wright, professor turned hotelier, widow turned entrepreneur, outsider turned community cornerstone, allowed herself to celebrate how far they had come. From a $600 auction purchase to a fully funded historical preservation project, from a condemned building to a beautifully restored landmark, from a solitary dream to a community endeavor. The Magnolia, like Eleanor herself, had been underestimated. Tomorrow, both would prove just how misguided that underestimation had been. Dawn broke over Hartwell Springs on the Magnolia's reopening day, painting the hotel's Victorian facade with golden light. Eleanor had been awake for hours, reviewing checklists and making final adjustments. The moment she'd worked toward for months had arrived, bringing both exhilaration and apprehension. "Flowers need refreshing in room 7, Georgia called as she hurried past with armfuls of fresh linens. The entire restoration team had arrived before sunrise, determined that every detail would be perfect for the first guests. "Coffee service is set up in the dining room," Lily reported, "and the welcome champagne is chilling for the afternoon reception." Eleanor nodded, mentally checking items off her list. "Has anyone seen Marcus this morning? He was supposed to bring the historic guest register for the display table." "He called to say he's running late," Carlos replied, emerging from the basement where he'd been making final adjustments to the spa facilities. "Said he had an unexpected errand, but would be here before the ribbon cutting." The ceremony was scheduled for 10 a.m., with specially invited guests including the mayor, historical society board members, and local media. The first paying guests would check in that afternoon, a fully booked weekend that would test every aspect of the restored hotel's operations. At 9:30, Victoria Sinclair arrived, impeccably dressed and carrying a small wrapped package. "A reopening gift," she explained, handing it to Eleanor. "A tradition among Hartwell Springs hoteliers." Eleanor unwrapped it to find an antique silver bell, clearly designed for a hotel reception desk. Its handle was shaped like a magnolia. Blossom, the magnolia's symbol delicately rendered in 19th century craftsmanship. "This was the magnolia's original desk bell," Victoria explained. "My grandmother borrowed it when the hotel closed in 2008. She thought it should be preserved. I think she'd want it to return home now." Touched by the gesture, Eleanor carefully placed the bell on the reception desk, where it looked as though it had always belonged. "Thank you, Victoria. This means more than you know." As guests began to arrive for the ceremony, Eleanor retreated to her apartment for a moment of composure. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a vintage-inspired dress in deep green that nodded to the hotel's historical character while remaining professionally contemporary. As she fastened her mother's pearl necklace, she caught sight of Michael's photograph on her dresser. "Wish you could see this," she whispered, touching the frame gently. "You would have loved it." A soft knock at her door preceded Lily's entrance. "Everyone's here," the teenager reported, including some surprise guests. "Surprises?" Eleanor echoed, immediately wary. Raymond Prescott had been conspicuously quiet since their confrontation over the water rights, which made her suspect he might be planning something disruptive. But when Eleanor emerged into the lobby, she found it filled with familiar faces. Beyond the expected dignitaries, former colleagues from her university had made the 3-hour drive to support her. Students she had mentored over her teaching career stood together in a group, beaming with pride at their professor's accomplishment. Even her sister-in-law, Michael's only sibling, had flown in from Seattle as a surprise. Most unexpected was the elderly man in a wheelchair, his formal suit a stark contrast to the oxygen tube discreetly arranged behind his ears. Judge Robert Williams, 93 years old and long retired from the federal bench, had been the youngest law clerk to accompany the Supreme Court justices on their mountain sessions at the Magnolia in the early 1950s. "Professor Wright," he greeted Eleanor formally, extending a veined hand. "When the Historical Society informed me of what you've accomplished here, I knew I had to witness it personally." The Magnolia was significant to American jurisprudence in ways few people understand. His knowing gaze confirmed he was fully aware of the documents in the presidential suite. As one of the few living people who had participated in those secret deliberations, his presence added profound historical continuity to the day's events. At precisely 10 a.m., Marcus Bennett arrived, carrying not only the historic guest register, but also a small procession of Hartwell Springs' oldest residents, people in their 80s and 90s who remembered the Magnolia's golden age and had stories to share with the assembled guests. The ceremony unfolded on the hotel's front porch, with Eleanor cutting a magnolia white ribbon stretched across the newly restored entrance. Her brief speech focused not on her own achievement, but on the building's significance and the community that had rallied to preserve it. "The Magnolia stands today because of collective belief in the value of history," she concluded, "not as a museum piece frozen in time, but as a living, functional connection between past and present. What we've preserved isn't just architecture, but continuity, the understanding that who we are is shaped by what came before." The crowd's applause was warm and genuine. As guests toured the restored areas of the hotel, Eleanor overheard snippets of conversation reflecting exactly what she'd hoped to achieve: wonder at the historical details, appreciation for the tasteful modernizations, and recognition that something valuable had been saved rather than lost. The morning's festivities transitioned to a luncheon in the dining room for the VIP guests, featuring dishes recreated from the Magnolia's original 1890s menu. Eleanor moved among the tables, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about future restoration plans. Judge Williams beckoned her to his table, where he sat with Victoria and several Historical Society board members. "I've been telling these youngsters about the significance of the presidential suite," he said, his voice lowered conspiratorially. "Without revealing state secrets, of course." "Of course," Eleanor replied with a smile. "I hope you'll visit again when the Supreme Court collection is properly archived and available for scholarly research." "I've already agreed to record an oral history," the judge confirmed, "though there are some details that will have to wait until I'm gone." His eyes twinkled with the satisfaction of secrets still kept after 7 decades. As the luncheon concluded, Eleanor slipped away to prepare for the arrival of the first paying guests. The hotel had been fully booked within hours of announcing its reopening, primarily by history enthusiasts and architectural aficionados eager to experience the restored landmark. "First arrivals in 30 minutes, Georgia reminded her. "Are you ready?" Eleanor surveyed the reception area, where Lily had volunteered to serve as temporary desk clerk. The antique registration book lay open, waiting for the first signatures in 15 years. The silver bell gleamed on the polished desk. "As ready as I'll ever be," Eleanor replied. The afternoon brought a steady stream of arrivals, each guest greeted personally by Eleanor and provided with a small welcome package that included historical information about the Magnolia and a sample of mineral salts from the spring. By evening, all 12 available rooms were occupied. The dining room was filled with happy patrons enjoying a carefully curated menu of local specialties, and the newly restored mineral spa had received its first delighted visitors. Eleanor finally allowed herself to relax slightly as she joined Victoria and Marcus for a quiet dinner in a corner of the dining room. "No disasters yet," she observed, sipping a well-deserved glass of champagne. "The night is young," Marcus teased, though his expression reflected unmistakable pride in what they'd accomplished. Victoria was watching the room with a professional hotelier's eye. "Your service flow needs minor adjustments," she noted, "but the guests are charmed by the imperfections. They see them as authenticity rather than flaws." "Which is exactly the experience we're aiming for," Eleanor agreed. "The Magnolia isn't trying to be the Prescott Plaza or Sinclair House. It's offering something different, a connection to history with the comforts of modernity, not luxury for luxury's sake." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Raymond Prescott appeared in the dining room doorway, scanning the space until his gaze landed on Eleanor. His expression was unreadable as he crossed to their table. "Miss Wright," he began formally. "I see congratulations are in order." Eleanor tensed, expecting some form of veiled threat or criticism disguised as a compliment. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott. I'm surprised to see you here this evening." "Professional curiosity," he replied smoothly. "Summit's investors are quite interested in how your historical approach performs in the marketplace." Victoria's eyebrow lifted slightly. "The Magnolia was fully booked within hours of announcing its reopening, Raymond. I'd say that's a fairly clear market response." "Opening weekend enthusiasm," Raymond dismissed. "The real test comes with sustained occupancy rates and profitability." He turned back to Eleanor. "Which brings me to my actual purpose this evening. Summit Development would like to propose a cooperative marketing arrangement." This was the last thing Eleanor had expected. "Marketing arrangement?" Raymond nodded, his businessman persona firmly in place. "Our market research indicates that a significant percentage of potential visitors to our planned resort would be interested in experiencing the historical Hartwell Springs as part of their stay. Rather than competing for these customers, we could create package experiences, a night or two at the Magnolia combined with several days at our modern facilities." Eleanor exchanged glances with Victoria, whose subtle nod confirmed this wasn't as outlandish as it initially seemed. "I'm open to discussing possibilities," Eleanor said carefully, "though I'm surprised by your change of approach, given our previous interactions." Raymond's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Business is business, Ms. Wright. You've proven your concept has viability. Summit adapts to market realities." After arranging to have formal discussions the following week, Raymond departed, leaving Eleanor wondering what had prompted this apparent strategic reversal. "He's up to something," Marcus muttered, watching Raymond's retreating form. "Undoubtedly," Victoria agreed, "but that doesn't mean the concept lacks merit. Hartwell Springs historically thrived when its various hospitality offerings complemented, rather than undermined each other." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of guest interactions, minor operational adjustments, and the 100 small details involved in running a hotel. By the time the last visitors had retired to their rooms, Eleanor was exhausted but deeply satisfied. She conducted a final walkthrough with Carlos, ensuring all systems were functioning properly, then retreated to her apartment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight the Magnolia had officially returned to life. The following morning, Eleanor awoke to the unfamiliar but welcome sounds of an operating hotel, discreet movements in the hallways, the distant clatter of breakfast preparation in the kitchen, the muffled conversations of early rising guests. For a moment, she simply lay still, absorbing the reality that the Magnolia was once again fulfilling its intended purpose. After dressing, she made her way to the dining room, where the breakfast service was already underway. The space hummed with conversation as guests enjoyed locally sourced offerings presented on vintage hotel china that Georgia had painstakingly collected from antique shops throughout the region. Eleanor moved from table to table, greeting guests and gathering feedback. The responses were overwhelmingly positive, with particular enthusiasm for the historical details and the mineral spa facilities. "I've stayed at luxury hotels all over the world," one guest told her, "but this place has something they can't manufacture. A soul. You can feel the history in these walls." By mid-morning, as the first guests began checking out, Eleanor received an unexpected call from the mayor's office requesting an urgent meeting. Concerned that some new regulatory issue might be emerging, she arranged to visit City Hall immediately. Mayor Helen Barnes welcomed Eleanor into her office with uncharacteristic warmth. "Congratulations on the Magnolia's successful reopening," she began. "The feedback I've received has been universally positive." "Thank you," Eleanor replied cautiously, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. The mayor had previously maintained careful neutrality regarding the Magnolia, neither supporting nor opposing its restoration. "I'll get straight to the point," Mayor Barnes continued. "The State Tourism Bureau has approached us about featuring Hartwell Springs in their upcoming promotional campaign. They're particularly interested in the Magnolia as a centerpiece of our town's historical character." Eleanor's wariness gave way to surprise. "That's wonderful news." "It potentially is," the mayor agreed. "However, there's a complication. The state wants to send a film crew next week to capture footage of the hotel, including areas still under renovation. They're interested in creating a restoration journey narrative that visitors can follow over time." "I don't see the complication," Eleanor said. "We'd be happy to accommodate their team." Mayor Barnes leaned forward slightly. "The complication is that Summit Development has also been approached for the same campaign. They've made it clear they would prefer the focus to remain on the modern amenities and future development of Hartwell Springs, not its historical character." Now the situation became clear, and you're caught in the middle of competing visions for the town's tourism identity. "Precisely," the mayor confirmed, "which is why I'm proposing a joint presentation to the State Tourism Bureau. Summit will highlight the modern luxury experiences planned for the Spa District, while the Magnolia represents our historical heritage. Together, they present Hartwell Springs as a destination that offers both innovation and tradition." It was a sensible approach, acknowledging the reality that the town's future prosperity likely depended on both elements. Yet Eleanor sensed an underlying political calculus in the mayor's proposal, a desire to avoid alienating either Raymond Prescott's powerful business interests or the growing community sentiment in favor of historical preservation. "I'm willing to participate in a joint presentation," Eleanor agreed, "though I would want assurances that the Magnolia's restoration receives appropriate emphasis in any resulting promotional materials." "Of course," the mayor assured her, "equal billing for both properties. The state sees this as an opportunity to appeal to different segments of the tourism market simultaneously." As Eleanor left City Hall, she pondered this unexpected development. Public recognition from the State Tourism Bureau would significantly enhance the Magnolia's visibility and credibility. Yet working alongside Summit Development, even in this limited context, required careful navigation. Returning to the hotel, Eleanor found Marcus and Victoria awaiting her in the lobby, their expressions suggesting urgent news. "What's happened?" she asked immediately. "Raymond Prescott has been making calls to the Historical Society board members," Victoria reported, her voice tight with controlled anger. suggesting that the Supreme Court documents should be removed from the Magnolia for proper institutional preservation at the state archives. Eleanor felt a chill of apprehension. On what grounds? Security concerns, Marcus supplied. He's implying that a commercial hotel can't provide adequate protection for materials of national significance. This was a clever attack, Eleanor had to admit. By focusing on the documents rather than the hotel itself, Raymond was attempting to undermine the Magnolia's unique historical significance, the very factor that had secured its grant funding and public support. The board wouldn't consider this without consulting me, she said, looking to Victoria for confirmation. Most wouldn't, Victoria agreed, but Raymond has relationships with several members. He's planting seeds of doubt about the appropriateness of keeping the collection here. Eleanor's mind raced through potential responses. The documents were legally hers as part of the property purchase, but their historical significance created ethical obligations that transcended simple ownership. If enough pressure mounted from legitimate historical preservation authorities, she might have difficulty maintaining control of the collection. We need to accelerate our archival plan, she decided. The agreement with the Historical Society included provisions for a proper research facility here at the Magnolia. If we can demonstrate concrete progress toward professional-grade preservation and security, we undercut Raymond's argument. Victoria nodded approvingly. I can have the Society's archivist visit tomorrow to develop specifications. With the grant funding already secured, we could fast-track the facility's development. Meanwhile, Marcus added, I've spoken with Judge Williams. He's agreed to make a public statement about the historical appropriateness of keeping the documents at their original site of creation. His endorsement carries significant weight in academic and legal circles. Their quick response to this threat demonstrated how effectively the Magnolia's supporters had become at anticipating and countering opposition. What had begun as Eleanor's solitary project had evolved into a coordinated team effort, with each member contributing specialized knowledge and connections. That afternoon, as Eleanor supervised check-ins for the new arrivals, she received an unexpected visitor. James Sinclair, Victoria's husband and co-owner of the Sinclair House, arrived with a business proposal of his own. We've been receiving inquiries from potential guests interested in the Magnolia, but seeking more luxurious accommodations, he explained. Rather than turning them away, Victoria suggested a partnership. Guests could stay at our property while participating in historical tours and experiences centered on the Magnolia, a heritage experience with luxury accommodations, Eleanor summarized thoughtfully. That could work beautifully for both properties. Exactly, James agreed. We're not equipped to offer the historical immersion the Magnolia provides, and you're intentionally not offering the level of luxury some travelers expect. Together, we create an option that captures both markets. This proposal, coming immediately after Raymond's attempt to undermine the Magnolia's historical credentials, felt particularly significant. The Sinclairs were positioning themselves as allies rather than competitors, recognizing the value of complementary offerings rather than direct rivalry. By evening, as Eleanor reviewed the day's occupancy reports and guest feedback, she realized that the Magnolia's position in Hartwell Springs was evolving rapidly. What had begun as a seemingly quixotic restoration project had become a catalyst for reimagining the town's entire approach to tourism and hospitality. Carlos stopped by her office with the weekly maintenance report, looking pleased with the hotel's performance. Systems are holding steady, he reported. The old girl is settling back into her routine nicely. Any issues with the spring? Eleanor asked. The agreement with Summit regulated water usage from the natural resource, requiring careful monitoring of flow rates and volume. Steady and strong, Carlos confirmed, and I've installed the new metering system so we have precise data on usage. Summit won't be able to claim we're exceeding our allocation." As Carlos departed, Eleanor sat back in her chair, reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed in the months since she'd purchased the abandoned hotel. From academic theory to practical application, from classroom lectures to hands-on management, from solitary grieving to community leadership, the transformation had been as significant for her as for the Magnolia itself. A knock at her door preceded Lily's entrance. The teenager had proven so adept at hotel operations that Eleanor had hired her part-time for the front desk, where her natural warmth and enthusiasm charmed guests. "The Historical Society just delivered this," Lily said, placing a large envelope on Eleanor's desk. Victoria said, "It's urgent." Inside, Eleanor found preliminary architectural plans for the proposed archival facility to house the Supreme Court collection. The Society's archivist had worked with remarkable speed to develop a concept that would occupy the currently unused library room adjacent to the presidential suite, transforming it into a secure, climate-controlled research space while maintaining the hotel's historical aesthetic. An accompanying note from Victoria explained that the Society Board had unanimously approved expedited funding for the facility in response to concerns raised about the collection's current housing, a diplomatic reference to Raymond's attempted interference. This rapid support reinforced Eleanor's growing recognition that the Magnolia's value extended far beyond its commercial potential. It had become a symbol of preservation in a community increasingly concerned about balancing progress with heritage. The following morning brought news that Judge Williams had indeed made a public statement to the State Historical Preservation Office, emphasizing the unique importance of maintaining the Supreme Court collection at its site of origin. His intervention effectively neutralized Raymond's attempt to have the documents relocated. "The battle's not over," Marcus warned when he brought the news. "Raymond's just shifting strategies. Next, he'll probably try to have the entire hotel designated as a museum rather than a commercial property. That would create a completely different regulatory framework, which would make normal hotel operations nearly impossible," Eleanor realized. Clever approach. "We should get ahead of it," Marcus suggested. "Designate specific areas of the hotel for museum-quality historical displays, but maintain the operational areas under standard hospitality regulations." This kind of strategic thinking, anticipating opponents' moves and preparing countermeasures, had become second nature to Eleanor and her team. What Raymond and Summit Development failed to understand was that each attack only strengthened their resolve and refined their approach. That evening, Eleanor received an unexpected email from her former university department chair. A major academic publisher was interested in a book about the Magnolia's restoration, focusing on the intersection of historical preservation, hospitality management, and community revitalization. The project would document not just the building's renewal, but the social and economic impacts of preservation-based development. As Eleanor considered the proposal, she realized it offered an opportunity to create another layer of protection. For the Magnolia, published documentation of the restoration process and its significance would make future attempts to undermine the project more difficult, creating a permanent record of what had been accomplished and why it mattered. More importantly, it would allow her to share the model with other communities facing similar challenges, places where historical properties stood at risk of demolition for lack of apparent commercial viability. The Magnolia's story could become a template for preservation efforts elsewhere. Late that night, Eleanor climbed to the rooftop observation deck that Carlos had recently restored. From this vantage point, she could see all of Hartwell Springs spread below her. The historic downtown with its century-old buildings, the newer developments along the valley floor, and the construction site where Summit's modern resort would eventually stand. The town was changing, as it always had. The Magnolia itself represented multiple eras of development, from its Victorian core to its 1920s East Wing addition to its mid-century modern West Wing. Each generation had left its mark while respecting what came before. That balance, honoring the past while embracing the future, was what Eleanor had fought to preserve. Not rigid adherence to history for its own sake, but thoughtful integration of heritage into ongoing community life. As she gazed at the town that had become her home, Eleanor felt a profound sense of purpose. The Magnolia wasn't just a building she had saved. It was a testament to the power of vision, persistence, and community. What had begun as one woman's seemingly impossible dream had expanded to include dozens of committed allies, hundreds of supportive community members, and now thousands of appreciative visitors. The hotel that everyone had expected to fail within months was now not only succeeding, but thriving, transforming perceptions of what was possible in Hartwell Springs and beyond. More importantly, it had transformed Eleanor herself, from a grieving widow seeking distraction to a confident leader with a clear mission. As she turned to descend the stairs, Eleanor caught sight of a shooting star arcing over the mountains that cradled the town. She smiled, remembering Michael's fondness for cosmic coincidences. Not subtle, she murmured to the night sky, but appreciated nonetheless. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Raymond's continuing opposition, the complexities of expanding operations to additional guest rooms, the demanding standards of the historical preservation community. But tonight, Eleanor Wright allowed herself to simply appreciate how far the journey had already taken her, and how many unexpected gifts it had bestowed along the way. The Magnolia stood restored, not just as a building, but as a living embodiment of persistence, vision, and the courage to see possibility where others saw only ruin. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.